I have a story about a man escaping. This was really early on because these were like the first 25 POWs at Stalag Luft 3. And they were getting skates and they were making like wire cutters with them. So this guy, it's snowy outside, and all the guys in the barracks are lined up watching him. He's covered with a sheet and he's just sprawling across, crawling across the compound, and he's going under the warning wire, which you can be shot if you're under the warning wire, within 10, 15 feet of the barbed wire. He's got a stump on his head, which has been carved out so he doesn't look like it. So it just looks like the stump is moving, right? Ridiculous. Really, really. So all of a sudden he looks up and there's an Alsatian German Shepherd right here in his face. And then there's a guard with a gun right here pointing it at him. And the guys in the barracks are just roaring because it's so funny to watch. And he ends up in the cooler for 2, 3, 4 weeks. I can't remember from his oral history, but this poor guy suffered, and yet he did it anyway, for the good of the whole. Too funny.
No, so that's good. I mean, it's good to, have the levity. And I mean, particularly with military, I mean, there's a real gallows humor amongst most of the, ex-service members I've spoken with. So like, they can laugh at a lot. So
yeah, for sure.
Pretty safe with them.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and ask me some of the questions that you have?
Well, I'm curious. So you've collected 200 of these, and out of, I mean, it's always challenging to get someone to sum decades of work up in something short. But I mean, what would you say is like one of your big impressions, or a few of your big impressions from having collected all these stories, spoken with the people, gotten them to have the chance to open up and share with you something that was challenging and meaningful for them?
Well, I think the difficulties that they talk about. I have a massage therapist, and I go for a massage, and I have to tell war stories. That's all she wants to talk about. She wants to learn more about the war. I go to my hairdresser to have a haircut, and she talks about, so what war stories are you going to tell me today? And these are women. I was in classrooms for about 3 months. I was in 51 classrooms around the state of Wyoming. And every one of the students, I gave them evaluation. I got about 3,000 back. And the women said, I don't care about the dates. I want to know the personal stories. The men would say, why didn't you talk about this mission? Why didn't you talk about, the Coral Sea? Why didn't you talk about this? And it's really about the story to me. And I think when you tell a human being's story, and I work diligently to be accurate, I work to, the minutiae so that I can tell that piece, because sometimes it's what pulls somebody in. Because some of the young men would just blow me off. One of them in one of the classrooms said, well, after I was done, he goes, well, how do you know these stories? And I had told him that I had recorded these men. I said, well, I've got the story firsthand from the man who was there. And he was like stunned. He didn't hear that part, I guess, in my introduction. And even when I was talking to my massage therapist the other day with Jack Kapmeyer, I love that man. Oh, when he couldn't talk anymore and then he died, I still miss him, because he was that man that just, I don't know, I just loved him so much. And he was so unlike, he wasn't handsome and debonair. He looked like an old farmer. And so I kind of ignored him. And then I got to know him, and he was one of the best human beings I had ever met. And it just taught me, all of them teach me multiple lessons. I mean, there's always a lesson somewhere within their story. Even some people that really, they didn't turn out to be the nicest human beings. We were in Germany, and they're smacking German cars not to get close to them, in a crosswalk. But truly it is who they became, and how, I can't tell you how many of them said to me something like this, you couldn't give me $1 million to take that away from me, nor could you give me $1 million to do it again. Right. And I think that is a really powerful statement, I think.
It is. That is. And I feel the same way about, I mean, though mine is much lighter than their experience, even, my military experience was very gentle compared to any of this, but I'd say the same thing about that. I wouldn't give it up for anything. I also wouldn't do it again.
And I wish I had served. Truthfully, I wish I had served in the military, because I realize I don't know if I can say this really, but
Mm.
you become someone different when you understand someone's adversity. And then you can look at your adversity and say, oh, am I creating a prison camp of my own making? And
Right.
can I overcome my fear? Do I have resilience? Do I have courage? And they teach you how to have all of those things. I want to study the brain too a little bit more. I want to look at a woman named Rita Brock wrote a book on moral injury. And intergenerational trauma can be passed down intergenerationally simply by the action. So I want to understand more and more about that. But I don't think that's really my message. I think my message is really about the adversity. Look at your adversity. I want you to step into these men's shoes. I want you to imagine walking 70 days in the coldest winter on record. I want you to imagine your feet. You're so tired. You sometimes you can sleep. They could sleep and skid at the same time, just about. But could you have done that? Would you, to save your life, eat bark and leaves and dirty vegetables out of the garden or the fields just to save your life? Could you do that? Would you do that today? And I look at where we are today with our shelves in Wyoming are slim sometimes. Food insecurity. I know there's a lot of food insecure people that live in Wyoming, especially women raising children, and that just makes me terribly sad. But they were all food insecure. Jack Catmeyer had 1,000 pounds of food in his basement when his executor cleared out the house. It all went to a food bank, but Jack was never going to be hungry again.
Right.
It's and we sit here and I don't like that steak. I'm going to send it. We wait.
That's a little too done. Let's get another one.
Yeah. I can be really judgmental about who we are today as a world and as a country. I don't want to go there though. I want people to actually to look at themselves and think about, a man walking 70 miles and he finally, anyway, it's another story. I can go on for hours. If you give me a topic, I could probably address it. One of the men I interviewed, his name was Bill Grafton, and he was a tiny gentleman, never married. He didn't finish high school because he wanted his branch of service. And if you didn't volunteer, you didn't get to choose.
Mm-hmm.
And he got back from the war, being a prisoner of war, and he decided he wanted to go to the University of Alabama and get an aeronautical engineering degree. Well, they said, you got to study and take this test. Well, he passed it with flying colors, got his degree, went to work for NASA. And the three people he worked with most were Wernher von Braun, Magnus von Braun, and Arthur Rudolph. And he tells the story about the Eagle lander. We were in Huntsville at the museum, and he told this story. And it landed, and the astronauts with their huge oxygen backpacks turned to go out of the lander, and one hit the switch that turned on that piece of equipment that they needed to get back to the mothership. And they didn't know what they would do. Fortunately, one of those astronauts had a ballpoint pen in his, I don't know if he had it on him or if it was in the lander, and they pushed on what they had to turn on the Eagle lander, or they would still be there.
Wow.
So imagine what that would mean to our world today. I mean, to us, to America today, if those men had failed, if they had died on the moon, where would we be? I mean, it's not even, and I had that story corroborated at a museum last fall when I was in Dallas. So it was interesting to have a display of that event. And the man, I was telling it to another person, he goes, the only thing you got wrong is that he didn't flip a switch up with the ballpoint pen. He could push this thing in.
Okay.
And but it's those sorts of things that make me think about, I don't know, they blow me away.
It's an interesting detail. I mean, it's amazing to me, like how much, in some sense, how delicate things seem. I have to wonder if they're actually as delicate as they appear, or if there's like such a synthesis of overlapping things that, you know, if this thing hadn't have happened, this other thing would have happened. So I mean, but it's a tiny little detail, and like you said, you know, we could have had like 3 dead bodies on the moon rather than a successful mission, you know, and that's how much would that have changed things, you know. And
I mean, my mouth's open right here as I sit here, kind of like, you know, in awe that it was a simple metal ballpoint pen that saved those men. You know, how do we solve our own problems? Not with a ballpoint pen, obviously. You know, I saw a guy with he was tapping the ground down with a broomstick hooked to a 4x4, taped to a 4x4, and he's tapping it down. And I thought to myself, God, I just go to Rent-It Center and get this big piece of equipment that uses gasoline. And I'm, you know, jolting me around. It just makes me think about, how can we simplify? How can I simplify my life? How can I do something I need to do without the big drama? And maybe I shouldn't label it drama. Maybe that's incorrect. But certainly, how we do things today is so much different. We want it easy.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
sometimes it's better.
You got to find a place. I mean, one of the things you've mentioned adversity, and I don't know if this is so bold as to turn this generation around or anything like that. I mean, you know, the hard times are always on their way. So, you know, we'll all get our opportunity. But to prepare for that, I think you've got to voluntarily engage with adversity in some area of your life. And there's lots of different things you can do. There's all different kinds of working out, and you can push yourself with that. There's all sorts of, you know, intellectual activities, whether it's writing or speaking or something, and you can find ways to push yourself with that. And you can do the same thing with relationships, which is sort of, you know, you could look at it as a relationship mode or an emotional mode of, you know, finding something that's tough for you, and rather than running away from it or trying to find the $5 solution at Amazon or Walmart or wherever, you know, actually facing the discomfort and figuring out how to move forward. You know, maybe taping the 2x4 to the broom rather than going
exactly.
the automatic machine, right? You know? So
exactly.
You figure out a way. I mean, I think anyone can find some place in their life where they can do that. And if it's small, that's fine. You start small and then, you know, you build up from there. But yeah, it's absolutely, I mean, part of the fuel for that kind of activity is these stories you're talking about. Because when I'm thinking of, you know, the frustration, you know, I got annoyed with, restaining the fence like a couple of months ago. And I mean, you know, okay, is it an annoyance? Are there a lot of people I don't see worrying with it? Sure. I can make it like my little bit of drama is a really big thing. But then you hear somebody that, you know, nearly had their hands and feet frozen off, that was, you know, eating dirt covered vegetables they had to dig up. And, you know, that was when it was good. Otherwise it was bark, you know. So it's a very shocking comparison, you know, what people did to survive and get by, as opposed to what I have to do in the suburbs, you know. So it's
what's even more shocking, though, is that so many of them came home determined to make a country better than they left. You know, several of them said, you know, I wasn't qualified to apply for this job, but I did it anyway. I wasn't afraid. What were they going to do? Say no? I didn't die. You know, I survived World War II. You know, I didn't die. I survived bailing out of an airplane. I didn't die. And I can remember one guy. Oh, I love this man. His son was actually the Pope's astronomer. So he knew, you know, yeah. And he wrote me and he said, I'm going back to Belgium because his plane hit a school and killed a number of children. Wow. And they were honoring those killed that day. And he said, I have to go. There's no one else that can go but me. But I have to go and show them that I honor those children. I mean, that's not exactly how he put it, right. But in his oral history, he talks about that. And it's such a powerful moment that he realized he had a responsibility to honor those children that people lost and mourned probably their whole lives. And sure, he could have been hackled or whatever, but he was going to go and mourn those children with their families. It just blows me away. Every time I,
courageous.
You know, when I start talking to you and I get another story, it's like, oh my God, what am I?
No, we're fine. I'm here for the stories.
Oh my word. Well, yeah, okay.
So it seems like you started off with the trip to Europe. That's how you kind of first got started in it. What pulled you in? I mean, cemented it for you to where, you knew this was a thing you were going to do for a long time or the rest of your life.
I didn't really know that. I
Mhm.
just was going to do what I was going to do is I was going to do World War II, and then I was going to go on to Korea, and then I was going to do Vietnam, and I was going to just do all of this stuff.
Mhm.
And I paid for all. I mean, I would travel. I would go see 3 or 4 people like in an area of the country, and I would just fly around there. And my husband would say, "God, we really can't afford it." And I go, "I know." And then a reunion came up, and he'd look at me to go, "You got to go, don't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I got to go." And he said, "Well, we'll see you when you come home." I mean, he was very accepting, and he told me after we got married, shortly, I don't remember when, but he said to me, "You can do anything you want to do. I will support you." And having that kind of value that he had of me, that he trusted me and believed that I knew what was important. And our children just hated the fact I'm leaving, and they would say, "Well, what if you get killed in an airplane, Mom?" And I'd say, "Hey, I got a bomb group in heaven. You have nothing to worry about. They're going to take care of me. They don't want me to nothing to happen to me because they wanted me to tell their stories." But it was hard sometimes. My husband he had a bone marrow transplant. He was dying of cancer. And we moved to Seattle, and I couldn't go to one of the reunions. And the POWs were so helpful to me. Like the guy saying, I explained to him what I was feeling. I either wanted to have an affair, kill myself, or plant flowers. And he
Mhm.
said, "My dear, you are in combat right now." And it was so interesting because it was like, yeah, that's what it is. It's combat with my mind, combat with all the things around me, running, racing, blood draws, IVs. I was just 2 kids. I was just, and working full time, and I was living in Seattle, and it was just insanity. And I felt like I was so fragile that you could touch me and I would just shatter like a piece of glass. And people would say things to me, "Well, I can tell you what we can do to help your husband's immune system." And it was like, "Excuse me, but shut the fuck up." And I know I would never say that, but you know what I mean? It was like, don't tell me anything else that I need to do that is going to work, because
Mhm.
he's got his sister's bone marrow. We just got to get him healthy. Don't come close to him. Don't shake his hand. He can't hug you. Do not do any of that. And I was the bad guy. And at the hospital, I was so irate about the nurses' long fingernails they had glued on, and they didn't wash their hands, and they wouldn't wash the top of a can of beverage, because he drank ginger ale because he got hiccups for hours at a time. And
Mhm.
I mean, he got psychosis from prednisone. So he thought he murdered someone in our house. And our daughter was sleeping on the floor next to our bed because she was only she was 10 years old. And so I go to try and get a new job and some good insurance because we were paying Cobra, and it was really expensive. And I
Mhm.
come home, and he thought he had stabbed someone to death. He called the police, and Emily's begging with him, "Dad, you didn't do it. You didn't do it." And our 16-year-old, she goes in to try to get Dane to help. And Dane says, "Don't bother me. I'm sleeping. I'm." So the police are running through the house. I come home, and it's like, what happened? It was
I can
just,
imagine what walking into that might be like.
it was like, what the hell? But you know what I did? I hid all the knives in the house because I didn't want him to. Well, who knows? I don't think he would.
Right.
I mean, he loves me, but I didn't know. I mean, he was not himself. And so it was just an interesting time in my life, which made, I think, the stories even more important.
Yeah.
I just never did give up on it. And I would be doing oral histories right now, but there's so few left.
Mm.
But I am a resource for people. Like had a doc up at the VA contact me this weekend that these people want to know about their father's military service and the medals that he deserved or that he got. I'm not sure, they were lost, I think. And so I can direct people to NARA and say, "Here, you fill out this form. It's going to take some time, but I can direct people to find their father's own story so that they finally get an aha moment about why he was the way he was. That it's just a more of an understand, because I have people tell me my father was in the Pacific and I hated the old bastard. It's like,
Mhm.
I'm so sorry. You never knew the man before the war.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy, isn't it?
It's, yeah.
There's
So
all these pieces that make up this whole. And it makes me remember when I get to just talk to someone and share stories, because it makes me remember the pieces that made it even more valuable to me, more important than ever. And my kids are going to buy me a sign for the outside of this doorway, because this is on the main floor of our house.
okay.
And it's going to be an old vintage sign that says war room, because truly that's what it is. It's the war room. I have a Vietnam parachute. I have, everybody thinks I'm the keeper of the uniforms, although one of these days I have to get rid of them. But anyway, more questions?
I did have this was about the TED Talk you had on, and I don't know if I missed the part where you explained it or whatnot, but what you were wearing, was that like a pilot suit with the life preserver? Or?
It was an N1 flight suit. Let me show you this picture. It was an N1 flight suit that the women wore. Just a sec, I got to sit down. I'm falling out of my chair. Let me set this down. It's an N1 flight suit. Can you see it?
Yes.
And so I have the jacket. I don't have the exact boots. I do have those boots, but they were so big. I can't stand for an hour in them because they're really uncomfortable. But it makes me feel like I am with them. It also has GI issue smell. And I don't know if you know what that is, but it just, I have a badge that I wore, and I have all these pins that people have given me that I always put on. And I always ask them to give me their words so that I tell their story in a way they want told. And it's kind of my sacred ritual. I wear the same earrings. I used to curl my hair, but my hair's long and stringy, and I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm old enough. I can wear my gray hair the way I want to.
Right.
But I do love to have them with me at some level, and that's my way, is wearing clothing that they would have worn. Or the WASP, the Women Air Service pilots. They were quite a group of women.
And do you get like sort of a visceral sense of that when you go onto a stage or speak with people with the clothing and the other things?
I do, and you notice that I had on gear. I had a different flight suit on. Then this is a different flight suit. That one's kind of coming apart and been moth-eaten, but I can show the electric cable that plugged into the airplane, and imagining that Lucky Luckadoo. I don't have his book in here. I'm reading his book, and he was a pilot in 43. And he says in the first chapter of his book, if you were a crew member getting into a B-17, there were 4 things that you feared. First, that you wouldn't come home. Second, that the equipment, the aircraft and the pilots of the Germans were more capable, were better. The equipment was better. The men were more capable because they fought. Thirdly was the flak. It was accurate, and they could hit them at 28,000 feet. The fourth thing was that they never realized the cold would be so harmful to those men, because it could be anywhere from 20 to 60 below zero. And they're trying to operate and shoot down. Now, when you're, firing a gun, or when you're in combat, certainly you can do anything, because you're just flowing with cortisol. You can do that. But, yeah. Anyway, so that answers that question, I hope. But
yeah, absolutely.